Marriott Hotel. Exclusive announce our hotel. First, do not call it. Press 2 now. Marriott Hotel. Receive a complimentary stay in one of our rooms now.
Will, I'm a winner.
You're a winner, sir. Hell yeah, you are. You are. You are. You are. Hell yeah, you are. Hell yeah, you are.
Winner. Well, thank you. I like them. Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I like to hear that. What did I win?
You want like coffee in your mouth.
No, that's just not going to work out too well for regular people. It's just they got bigger guns.
I was on an attitude, man. It's the money that's taken from us.
Better have your fucking form.
Yeah, I said we can say that it would take about $180 billion to eradicate poverty.
Just not gonna work. You're in Florida. You know what they say about Florida. Get to Florida.
It's the money that's taken.
Better have your fucking form. Just not gonna work out too well for regular people. It's just not. They got bigger guns.
Not with that attitude, man.
Hold on, dude. I'm choco, so automatically caught bullets here. I just know. You try to kick back. People kick back. That's the only
What are your views on Israel?
To tell the truth, I really don't have any views on it. I've never been there, one. Two, I don't think they really like my kind. I'd be an outsider.
Grumpy.
Give me back that up.
You're multitasking.
So what's your kind?
My kind? Humankind. Humankind.
What are you playing?
What are you talking about?
I'm playing NHL.
I'm a human.
NHL, NHL, the only way you're going to get in it.
Me too, brother.
Just that's the way it works. If you're not them, you're us. And if you're not us, you're them. Unfortunately, there are more of them than there are us.
Got to play the video game.
Hey, while I got you, I'm broadcasting live.
Yes, sad.
Right now, and I lucked out with you. I want to see if you can give us a little shout out to the station. To the station, radio. Radio.
Get used to it. I have nothing to say.
That's cool.
Something that I haven't happened.
That's what you're for.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. It also shows our background. They have been a porta potty.
You spent a lot of money.
I'm on my direction, bro.
All right, now we got
right now.
They can't see. I'm ready to drop in. They can only hear it. That one dude that states around it, like a video. Wow, the dude that was Deadpool. How many years? 9? You better have your fucking about to say you should have your PhD in another year. Yeah, we got a PhD in yours, So I guess I'll rearrange the chromosome. I like that, right? If anybody wants to, explain to me, I'm a linger. What is a frost?
You know, like I broke away, jamming out, stuff coming up, jamming out. Broadcast for about an hour. Hell yeah. It's the fever. Locked up. What do you broadcast? What do just jamming out, jamming out for the money is fun. People give us money. That's what we do. We have to explain ourselves for anonymity. Today's modern society, they try to give us free electricity. So we gotta do what we do. That's what's going on. However, I got it. That's almost all. Dang. Hey, give me a shout. Yeah. Unluckily, luckily. Don't worry about it. I wasn't ready to talk. Question. Gonna give you what 3 words? Best words describe you. Me? Yes. Best 3 words. Best 3 words. Connect with me. Combine the time or context or nothing. What? 3 words. How much time do you need? I don't know. Do whatever you do. That question. I'll find it out. Fine. We'll say weird, loud, and beautiful. WLB. I like that. That was going out. Kick back. 29,000 all together, right down, at the same time. We don't know, but we go around. It's alive. We should really regretted. I don't really have anything to say about the whole bummed out. I'm glad people bought solar. A couple of solar generators still around. Price speeds, all that stuff. Crap. I don't even know. It's like virus. I'm more worried about natural volcanic eruption.
I see.
What the heck? What the heck is going on?
Sorry, I had to worry. I had to
Thank you. That was very kind of you. So I do not want you to what are you up to today? Stumbled on you.
I'm not doing anything. Why I'm on.
Yeah. You look comfortable. You're not. You blew your nose. That was a safe. That was not. It was just like. It wasn't a contagious snot.
No.
Okay, that's good. That's good. How much is that? How much is that down where you're at right now?
Well, my college is shut down. For a week, I think, but they're probably going to shut it down longer.
All right.
Not a bunch. They're obviously not allowed to have meetings of 100 people or more. So like churches and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that you're safe and prepared.
My state. I don't even know. I feel like
some small businesses.
Maybe some restaurants. What's gonna go up over there? I heard gas prices. Nobody's going anywhere, so I know it don't make much sense. Go to take what's there. Sit around.
Better have your fucking. I'm about to say, you should have your PhD.
Hey, already podcast live on
Bleed them dry.
Life. Yeah, that's what I'm impressed about life as well. So we got that going. However, I see depression kind of funny. It's one of those things. Like I never really understood it. One, I guess I'm mental in that sense. And however, I guess if I'm ever
In a sense of being depressed, I guess I think it's something better. I don't know. It's weird. Something sad. It's weird. Sometimes I hear, I think depression, something you think so much about future events that you just can't do anything about, and it kind of stymies you. If that seems like in my like. That's part of it. And it has to do with worrying about things you can't control. Yeah. But also it has to do with some present things and some past things have already passed, correct? No. It's just, I said no. No. It's amazing how the past has affected the present. Okay, alright. See, you say that and then my brain goes like, son of a bitch, America. Why? I never had a conversation with a random outside when I went outside. It wasn't recently, but we were talking. It's like people in the singular are smart. However, when you get people together, all together, they're stupid. We can't control that. I wish it wasn't. I wish it wasn't. Well, we, as singular individuals, try not to, when we get in groups, be stupid with them. Yes, it's easier to go along with the crowd than it is to do something stupid by yourself. Well, I do a lot of stupid things. Look at the porta potty. This is as stupid as it gets. Talking to people on the internet, just trying to get to the back. But also what I was going to say, damn it. Got all excited. But yeah, it's like individually, we are smart. However, we just have to try to keep that and share that with other people. Just say, hey, man, whoa, don't be afraid to go in there. This is stupid. Have some fun and seeing a group of friends that want to do something stupid. Don't do it, man. It's a bad idea. I got done from anime, from Marky High. It's like the whole show starts off like that.
And it's a bad
idea. Anime about delinquents. Just of like, yeah, Cromartie High. So yeah, don't do it, man. It's bad.
When you know so stupid, it's like, whoa. Don't do that, man. 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 Potty.
Hagbard can be heard saying as we dolly in for a close-up of his swarthy Sicilian face. Actually, he's half Norwegian and has a raft of Irish relatives named McGee and Marlowe in Ohio somewhere. As the camera pulls back, we see Hagbard standing between two rows of minor birds, each perched on a separate miniature lemon tree. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. The birds robotically repeat, thereby being programmed for self-destruct when he unleashes them in New York City. Honest to God, ever seen Wilder Blood? New York's bitchiest literary critic is later heard telling a crowd of skeptics in the office of Confrontation magazine, the damned bird committed suicide. I was sitting in Washington Square and I heard him cackling, here, kitty, 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 just like that. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. It was a big Siamese that got him, but every cat in the neighborhood was on the prowl by then. I tell you, this city has reached the end of its rope if even the birds are turning depressive psychotic. Tell that to the Occult Digest, Joe Malick said skeptically. Actually, Joe, who had edited Confrontation all through the eras of Joe McCarthy and Jim Garrison, and Watergate and Linda Lovelace, was almost a transcendental agnostic by now, ready to embrace any insane rumors possibly true. If the real is so often bizarre, then the bizarre may often be real, had become his motto. But, he always added, you've got to draw the line somewhere, as Mason said to Dixon. Drawing the line had admittedly become increasingly difficult for him, especially since the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, when he met Simon Moon of the nameless anarchist horde and learned of the mysterious and diabolical Bavarian Illuminati. Cut. Tight close-up on Simon Moon as he tells us about himself. Well, Dad, and Mom were both anarchists, dig? He was the Bakunist, IWW, one big union, and keep the steel helmet handy, boys. The revolution is coming any day now. She was the Tolstoyan, non-violence, the Jesus trip. The next step in evolution is universal love. So naturally I rebelled against both of them and became a disciple of Donation Alphonse Francois de Sade. For a while. But then Padre Pederasti introduced me to the jams. The jams. Justified ancients of Mumu are an ancient Babylonian secret society, worshippers of Mumu, god of chaos. The Chinese Taoist laughs at civilization goes elsewhere, Simon explains helpfully. But the Babylonian Taoist sets termites at the foundations. When Simon and Padre Pederastia recruited Joe Malik, a process begun at the last ever SDS convention 1969 and continued into the 1970s, Joe being then still a confirmed skeptic. The Jams were engaged in the 59th century of their war against the Illuminati, not counting a few centuries of alliance. Joe Malik, whose narrow, intelligent face contained all the ambiguities of an Arabian-American intellectual who was raised Roman Catholic, joined the Trotskyists during the Hitler-Stalin Pact and edits a magazine radical enough to attract tons of crackpot mail every week, smiles tiredly. Before meeting Simon and the Padre, the only people I ever heard talk about the Illuminati conspiracy were right-wing cranks. I was sure Simon was putting me on at first, but then I met the leader of the Jams. Thunder on the soundtrack. Eerie shadows cross Joe's face. We are standing outside a bungalow in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Simon knocks. Joe looks nervous. The door opens and a feisty little man says, "So you're the new recruit. Come in and tell me how a goddamn intellectual can help us beat the shit out of the cock-sucking Illuminati motherfuckers." This little old fellow has a peculiarly mocking and stony glitter in his eyes. He is John Dillinger, now living under the name Frank Sullivan, and president of Laughing Flowers Productions, king of the rock music industry. Dillinger's first robbery in 1923 was a travesty. The victim, a grocer named B.F. Morgan, gave them a sonic signal of distress, and John made a deal with the DA but landed in prison anyway. Sure that the Masons were behind this betrayal, John joined the Jams and subsequently used their motto, "Lie down on the floor and keep calm," during each of his bank heists. This was his way of taunting J. Edgar Hoover, a 33rd degree Mason and high Illuminatus Primus. Hoover, in turn recognizing the Leaping Bandit, the tabloid's gaudy title to John, as a Jam agent, gave orders which resulted in the shooting of the 3 innocent businessmen at Little Bohemia Lodge, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, when they were mistaken for the Dillinger Gang. Smarting from criticism after this blunder, the FBI subsequently kept quiet when the man they shot at the Biograph Theatre, July 22, 1934, also turned out to be an innocent bystander. Dillinger, meanwhile, was promoted to a higher rank in the Jams and gave up such crude tactics as knocking over banks. Now an old man in the mid-1970s, Dillinger has decided to...
Okay, what kind of PhD are you going for? I want to find out.
Pirate extraordinary and breeder of self-destruct minor birds. Simon Moon. Hagbard's a right-wing crank.
Shit like that, right?
Joe Malik. I don't know. Hagbard's a genius, that's for sure. Unfortunately, his IQ is devoted mostly to keeping the world confused about what his real motives and aims are. Unknown. Hagbard, in fact, is the discoverer of the snafu principle, which holds that communication is possible only between equals. Every hierarchy, therefore, in order to repress equality, must also repress communication. This, he claims, is the Achilles heel of armies, corporations, governments, and other front groups used by the Illuminati in their conspiracy to govern mankind. Where the Jams worship the Babylonian god of chaos, Mumu, Hagbard's Legion of Dynamic Discord worships Eris, Greek goddess of confusion, who is also known in Latin as Discordia. Conversations among the Discordians usually begin, "Hail Eris," "All hail Discordia," "Callisti." Unknown to the Jams, Hagbard also has an alliance with the Arisian Liberation Front, ELF, a super Zen, super secret insurrection following a program known as Operation Mindfuck, OM, and directed by the Dalai Lama, who lives in the sewers below Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. Close-up of a computer face, almost as bland as HAL 9000. This is Fuck Up. First universal cybernetic kinetic uniprogrammer. Hagbard's greatest invention. Fuck Up throws I Ching hexagrams internally, reading random open circuits as yin lines and closed circuits as yang. These are then correlated with 3,000 years of I Ching scholarship, current astronomical and astrological data, CBS News, and reports from Hagbard's agents in world capitals, thereby combining in Fuck-Up's memory integration circuits a world game report unique in its comprehensive objectivity. World War III is imminent, Fuck-Up reports blandly. Prognosis: many megadeaths. No blame. My ass, no blame, Hagbard rages. He now realizes the true importance of the Fernando Poo incident. Fernando Poo is a tiny island in the Bay of Biafra off the coast of Africa, where Captain Ernesto Tequila Imota has arranged his own promotion to Generalissimo by staging a blitz coup d'etat. Crack CIA agents quickly report to Washington that the new regime is under the control of Russia and China. But Russian agents report to Moscow that it's under the control of China, and Chinese agents report to Peking that it's under the control of Moscow. Hagbard, recognizing the fine hand of the Illuminati, reprograms Fuck-Up to locate the source of major danger and is told that Las Vegas needs watching. Sherry Brandy, née Sharon O'Farrell, gives us her version. The only way to make some scratch is to sell your snatch. At least that's the story in this hard-ass town. So I work for Carmel, who isn't bad as pimps go, if you don't mind getting beat all black and blue every so often. But now Carmel thinks we can get rich. Carmel, indeed, is convinced that Sherry's latest John, Charlie Mocenigo, has discovered the ultimate secret weapon. Obviously, if he and Sherry can steal it and sell it to the goddamn commies, they'll both be millionaires. Alas, the secret weapon is anthrax leprosy pie, ALP, a virus with certain unpredictable properties. Mocenigo and Sherry are both killed by an accidental infection, and Carmel unknowingly becomes a kind of typhoid Mary. Since nobody else is aware of this significant fact either, the world is dancing on the edge of an abyss, watching Fernando Poo with trepidation, while only Fuck-Up and Hagbard Chelene know the real threat is coming from Las Vegas. Fish and Chips, English secret agent 00005 has already discovered that all the American, Russian, and Chinese reports from Fernando Poo are inaccurate. He, alas, has jumped to his own wrong conclusion and believes that bugger, bad, unreformed goons, gangsters, and espionage renegades, headed by Eric the Red Blowhard, is behind the coup there. Chips has never heard of the Illuminati. Acting on orders from Hagbard, Joe Malik sends Confrontation Star reporter George Dorn to Mad Dog, Texas, to investigate the right-wing groups there, one of which is widely rumored to be behind the assassinations of John and Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, George Lincoln Rockwell, and Spyro Agnew. Joe smiles knowingly. And that's what I told George. He winks. In Mad Dog, George is busted for possession of marijuana and hustled off to jail by Sheriff Jim Cartwright. George's cellmate, a snaky-looking individual named Harry Coyne, first brags about killing various famous people, then attempts to rape George. The jail is then invaded by a mysterious group led by Mavis, a young lady in a trench coat carrying a Tommy gun, and they remove George after blowing holes in the walls. On the way out, George sees a hidden chapel with a pyramid-shaped altar and an open eye on top with the slogan, Ewiger Blumenkraft. Mavis tells him that Mad Dog Jail is the secret headquarters of the Bavarian Illuminati. George is driven to the Gulf of Mexico, where he and Mavis just have time to argue politics and engage in a little friendly oral before the Leif Erikson appears. This is a gigantic golden yellow submarine owned by Hagbard Chelene, who explains to George that he is neither left-wing nor right-wing, but a political non-Euclidean. The Illuminati, Hagbard goes on, is the cause of all unhappiness in the world. A vast secret society founded by the Mason and former Jesuit Adam Weishaupt in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, May 1st, 1776. Back in New York, however, Saul Goodman, inspector of the homicide squad, is investigating the bombing of Confrontation and the mysterious disappearance of editor Joe Malik. The strange aspect of the case is that Malik's dogs, he had an apartment full of them according to neighbors, also disappeared. Stranger yet is the fact that magazine staffers insist Joe is allergic to dogs. Strangest of all is a series of memos found in Joe's apartment. Quoting various authorities, academic and otherwise, these memos give a strange variety of theories about the Illuminati. To wit, 1. According to French sociologist Jacques Ellul, the Illuminati was founded in the 11th century by disciples of Joachim of Flores and tried to redistribute wealth by robbing the rich. They were vanquished by law and order in 1507 and ceased to exist. But the National Review claims Joachim's followers still survive and are seeking to immanentize the eschaton. 2. According to Daral's History of Secret Societies, the Illuminati was begun by Hassan I-Sabah in 1092, entered Spain in 1623, spread throughout Europe, and infiltrated Masonry via Adam Weishaupt in 1776. 3. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the Illuminati was founded by Weishaupt in 1776 and suppressed by the Bavarian government in 1785. 4. According to a letter in Playboy, the Illuminati is still in existence and masterminded the assassinations of recent years. 5. According to Teen Set magazine, the Illuminati controls the rock music business. 6. According to American Opinion magazine, the Council on Foreign Relations is the latest manifestation of the One World conspiracy, originally founded by Weishaupt's Illuminati. 7. According to The Spark, a Chicago newspaper, Mayor Richard Daley used the Illuminati slogan Ewiger Blumenkraft during his diatribe against Abe Rippikoff at the 1968 convention. Furthermore, Weishaupt and George Washington were the same man. 8. According to CBS Radio, paintings of Washington are so different that they look like more than one man. 9. According to the East Village Other, New York, the current leaders of the Illuminati, 1969, are Manaclips the Younger, Mousy Tongue, Mordecai the Foul, Richard Nixon, Aga Khan, St. Eucerian, Nelson Rockefeller, St. McMurphy, Lord Omar, and Mark Lane. This one must be a hoax, Saul Goodman concludes thoughtfully. 10. According to Virginia Bracington's Flying Saucers in the Bible, the Eye in the Pyramid Illuminati symbol was given to Jefferson by a mysterious man in a black cloak. Neither Jefferson nor any other of the founding fathers knew what it meant, but they put it on the Great Seal anyway. 11. According to Planet, San Francisco, the Eye in the Pyramid design is the symbol of Timothy Leary, Ph.D. 12. According to Proofs of a Conspiracy by 18th century Mason John Robeson, the Illuminati was not destroyed by the 1785 crackdown by the Bavarian government and was still trying to infiltrate Masonic groups everywhere. They supervised the French Revolution, Robeson says, and are plotting more revolutions. 13. According to World Revolution by Nestor Webster, the Illuminati controls all socialist, communist, and anarchist groups. The celebration of May 1st as International Labor Day by these groups actually honors the founding of the Illuminati on May 1st, 1776. 14. According to History of Magic by French Kabbalist Eliphas Levi, the Illuminati was founded by Zoroaster and introduced to Europe by the Knights Templar in the 12th century. 15. According to High IQ Bulletin, the Illuminati are invaders from the planet Venus. 16. According to Libertarian American, the Illuminati is the political front of the Vril Society, where Adolf Hitler received his occult education. Their aim is Christian socialism as distinguished from godless Russian socialism. 17. According to Los Angeles Free Press, the Theosophical Society has been accused by John Birch Society members of being the chief front for Illuminati activities. And the founder of the Illuminati, they say, was Cain, son of Eve and the serpent. 18. According to Levi's History of Magic, again, the Holy Vam, a kind of medieval Catholic version of the Ku Klux Klan, was the morals enforcement wing of the Illuminati in the Middle Ages. 19. According to Daral's History of Secret Societies, the Nazis revived the Holy Vam, and it may still be active today. After comparing and reviewing these memos, Saul Goodman deduces by rigorous logic that the Illuminati have inspired much of this literature to conceal their real identity and actual motives. Meanwhile, Barney Muldoon of the bomb squad finds evidence annoying to himself that the Illuminati are controlled by the Jesuits. Comparing notes, Saul and Barney conclude that the Illuminati are actually Satanists who have infiltrated every organization from Catholicism to Masonry to sow conflict and achieve their own ends. Unfortunately, soon after arriving at this deduction, Saul is kidnapped, held prisoner in a fake mental hospital, and put through a psychedelic brainwashing process intended to convince him he is Barney Muldoon, a patrolman on the Newark police force, suffering from the hallucination that he is Saul Goodman, an inspector on the New York police force. Hagbard Chalene, meanwhile, races towards sunken Atlantis in the Leif Erikson, hoping to see some golden statues which the Illuminati are planning to melt down to finance their current projects. George Dorn is hardly initiated into the Legion of Dynamic Discord, with the lusty assistance of a lovely black lady named Stella Maris. But let George tell it himself. Well, wow, I'm no hero, you know. I'd rather be initiated again, especially by Stella, or maybe Mavis. I mean, a Discordian initiation is something special, I'll say, Stella interjects lewdly. But the next thing I know, Hagbard has me up on the bridge, and we're talking to a dolphin named Howard, and about to be attacked by 5 Illuminati spider ships. Maybe I've been smoking too much of that great Callisti gold grass that Hagbard grows, but it was all a big freak out. What's it like to drown at the bottom of the Atlantic? The water pressure must crush you atom by atom, I imagine. And the Illuminati are ready to blast us with everything they have. I just go away from there in my head, you know. And I'm back in the Morituri Underground in my younger days, when Carla wanted me to kill a pig to show my dedication to the revolution. So there I am, trailing this cop down Broadway in the 70s, trying to get the courage to pull the gun out of my pocket. And how the dolphin is yelling through the intercom, "Here come the spider ships!" And I'm still remembering Stella's luscious, lovely, yummy pussy, and I don't know if I'm in a porny novel, a science fiction movie, or the real world. And I got this ESP flash that this cop had a retarded 4-year-old child, and suddenly that made him human, so I knew I couldn't kill him. Wow, man, you see? It was heavy. George later, or earlier, it depends on which of his time tracks we're in, tried to shoot himself in the head, despising his cowardice, but the gun provided by the Morituri Underground didn't fire. Well, yeah, sure. Simon Moon is honing in on the narrative again. Morituri is no kindergarten. We all know that. But every time I hear Joe Hill, I think of my father. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. I never died, says he. And both lines are true. The morning never ends, and the revolution never ends. Whatever way you're fighting it, read Assad, or ask John Dillinger. You don't come alive as a person until you break the laws. Inside the legal cage, you're nothing but a robot. He bursts into song. Though cowards cringe and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. Down, boy. Go on, George. Well, yeah, Hagbard finally blasted all 5 of those Illuminati spider ships, and we salvaged the golden Atlantean statues. They were gorgeous, if you like antediluvian porno. I mean, but then Hagbard told me my first mission as a Discordian was to take them to the headquarters of the leader of the Mafia. I shit. Actually, George did fairly well on his visit to the Blue Point, Long Island home of Robert Putney Drake, famous banker and philanthropist, unacknowledged governor of the Mafia, and Illuminatus Primus. It was arranged that in return for the statues, Drake would break with the Illuminati, sign a treaty with the Discordians, and arrange the assassinations of 23 top Illuminati officials in the United States as a gesture of good faith. Afterwards, George was entertained in his bedroom by Tarantella Serpentine, the lady who taught Linda Lovelace everything. George was very entertained indeed. But the Fernando Poo incident was escalating. The President of the United States gave Russia and China 24 hours to get their troops out of Fernando Poo or else. The or else was taken by terrorized Earth people everywhere to mean all-out thermonuclear war. The Kremlin and Peking will leak the information that it also meant anthrax leprosy pie, which in fact was already loose on the person of the little Las Vegas pimp Carmel, unknown to anyone. And in Fernando Poo, the brave but dumb English agent Fish and Chips, after a glorious fuck with a lady named Concepcion Galore, learned about a mysterious church of St. Toad and decided to investigate it, whilst the rulers of Russia and China, having no troops in Fernando Poo, politely informed the world that the president of the US was a mental case. The chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, thereupon finding Marx no source of inspiration in such parlous times, threw the I Ching sticks and puzzled over hexagram 23, breaking apart. And things are moving faster now. Saul Goodman discovers that the phony psychiatrist treating him in the fake mental hospital is actually the missing editor Joe Malik. They are both aboard Hagbard's submarine Leif Erikson, bound for Ingolstadt, Bavaria, where the Illuminati hope to use the energies of Woodstock Europa, a gigantic rock festival, to immanentize the eschaton. What does immanentize the eschaton mean? Saul demands. But just then, the submarine is attacked by the Illuminati spider ships, and we are back in Simon Moon's interminable monologue again. A glorious fuck? What the hell does a government agent like Fish and Chips know about glorious fucking? Let me call a witness for the anti-government forces. She'll tell you about glorious fucking. Mary Lou? Documentary-style close-up on Mary Lou's cervix. A black cop sent to infiltrate the nameless anarchist horde, who ended up learning tantra from Simon Moon also. At first I thought Mr. Simon motherfucking Moon was a stone kink, an Ignatz, you know? I mean, trying to ball sitting up? It's from Bizarresville. And I got a backache the first half hour, but he kept telling me, just hang in there, just hold on, baby. And then it started to happen. That Kundalini, he calls it. Earthquake City. Wilder than the time I had to take acid with the weather people trying to infiltrate them. The ancient Babylonian secret of serpent power, he calls it. Simon coughs modestly. Our secret weapon against the Illuminati, neuroprogramming the Sixth Circuit. See Dr. Leary for details. To reveal everything is an ineptness, Hagbard Chalene remonstrates. Truth must come to bloom slowly like a secret flower in the heart. We don't communicate much better than the dogs most of the time, as per my famous snafu principle. True communication in the egalitarianism of neurology is more complex than galactic law. He stares into the distance, remembering Uncle John Feather. Uncle John, a Mohawk Indian, gives us the moral of this fable, fairly straightforwardly for once. You are a good lawyer, Hagbard, I know that. But can you tell the truth in a government court? I doubt it. They make their own rules and everything relevant is declared irrelevant. But that was over 20 years ago. And after the Mohawk land was taken from them, Hagbard abandoned law for piracy. Seeking a more honest way of making a living, he says with that hawk-like look in his eye. But back in present time again, Danny Pricefixer of Homicide Squad New York is investigating the disappearances of Joe Malik, Saul Goodman, and Barney Muldoon. Some of the references in the Illuminati memos draw him, like most of our characters, into past time, where he was once a detective on the Arkham, Massachusetts police force and investigated the disappearance of Professor Joshua Marsh of Miskatonic University. Professor Marsh had written a book on the lost continent of Atlantis, claiming that the Atlanteans worshipped gods called the Hlwagor, who actually existed, extrasolar visitors to Earth from higher civilizations in remote galaxies. Alas, every clue in the Marsh case led to a dead end, and Danny never did find out what happened to the eccentric professor. The one lead that bothered me most, Danny tells our interviewer, was the Fënords. What in the hell are Fënords? But just the day before his disappearance, Professor Marsh was overheard by several witnesses talking to himself in the Miskatonic library. I've seen the Fënords, he kept saying. Now I ask you, what can a poor cop do with a clue like that? It's depressing. A visit to the New York Public Library and some browsing among occult books gives Danny the information that many traditions trace the Illuminati back to Atlantis or to some interstellar source. Waking in the big bed, George Dorn finds Tarantella has left him. But how did Mavis get here? Looking down at his elderly hands, he sobs, "You've won. I'm no longer sure who I am, or which way time runs." "No," Mavis says. "You've won, Saul. You're waking up at last." "You mean I am Saul Goodman, but I'm all the others too?" "Who asks that question?" Mavis responds, like a Zen master. But returning to his hotel suite, Fish and Chips finds Concepcion Galore lying in his bed with her throat cut from ear to ear, and beside her the emblematic flame dagger of Hassan I Sabah. "Damn blast and thunder! Every time I find a good piece of ass, those fuckers from Bugger come along and shaft her." And the White House order is given. The SAC bombers head toward Fernando Poo and the Third World War. Rising organ music. Can World War III be averted? Will Carmel infect the whole world with anthrax leprosy pie? What is Hagbard's real angle anyway? Who are the Illuminati and what's their angle? Continue listening for the next psychotic episode.
3 hours after Drake's death, George Dorn lay on his holding a phone to his ear, listening to it ring. A young woman's voice on the other end suddenly said,
"Hello?
"I'd like to speak to Inspector Goodman,"
said George. There was a momentary pause, then the voice said,
Who's calling, please?"
"My name is George Dorn, but it probably wouldn't mean anything to the inspector. But would you ask him to come to the phone, please, and tell him I have a message for him about the case of Joseph Malik?"
There was a constricted silence, as if the woman on the other end of the phone wanted to scream and had stopped breathing. Finally, she said,
"My husband's working just now, but I'll be glad to give him any message you have."
"That's funny,"
said George.
"I've been told Inspector Goodman's duty hours are noon to 9 p.m.
I don't think it's any of your business where he is."
The woman suddenly blurted. George felt a little shock. Rebecca Goodman was frightened, and she didn't know where her husband was. Something in the tone of her last 3 words revealed her mental state to George. I must be getting more sensitive to people, he thought.
"Do you ever hear from him?"
he said gently. He was feeling sorry for Mrs. Inspector Saul Goodman, who was, come to think of it, the wife of a pig. If just a few years ago, George had read in the paper that this woman's husband had been shot down at random by some unknown revolutionary type assailants, he probably would have whispered, "Right on." One of George's own friends of that period might have killed Inspector Goodman. There was even a moment when George himself might have done it. Once, one of the kids in George's group had called up the young widow of a policeman killed one December by young blacks and called her a bitch and the wife of a pig and told her that her husband was guilty of crimes against the people and that those who had shot him would go down in history as heroes. George had approved of this verbal action as a means of hardening oneself against bourgeois sentimentality. The papers had been full of stories about how this policeman's 3 little kids would have no Christmas this year. Such tripe made George urgently want to throw up. But now this woman's anguish was coursing through the wire, and he was feeling it, just because her husband was not known to be dead, just missing. And probably not dead at all. Otherwise, why would Hagbard have said that George should get in touch with him?
I don't know what you mean,
she said. She was starting to break, George thought. In another minute, she'd be blurting out all her fears to him. Well, for Christ's sake, he didn't know where Goodman was. Look, he said sharply, pushing back against the flow of emotion coming through to him.
If you hear from Inspector Goodman, tell him if he wants to know more about the Bavarian Illuminati, he should call George Dorn at the Hotel Tudor. That's D-O-R-N, Hotel Tudor. Have you got that?
The Illuminati. Look, Mr. Dorn, whatever you want to tell, you can tell me. I'll pass it on to him.
I can't do that, Mrs. Goodman. Thank you now. Goodbye.
Wait, don't hang up.
I can't help you, Mrs. Goodman. I don't know where he is either.
George dropped the phone into its cradle with a sigh. His hands were cold and moist. Well, he'd have to tell Hagbard he couldn't reach Inspector Goodman, but he had learned something, that Saul Goodman, who was supposed to be investigating Joe Malick's disappearance, had himself disappeared, and the words Bavarian Illuminati meant something to his wife. George crossed the small room and turned on the TV. The new news would be on. He went back to his bed, lay down, and lit a cigarette. He was still exhausted from his sexual bout of the night before with Tarantella Serpentine. The announcer said,
"The Attorney General has announced that he will speak at 6 this evening on the early morning epidemic of gangland-style assassinations at widely separated locations all over the country. The death toll from killings of this type has reached 27, though local officials refuse to say whether all or any of these deaths are connected. Among those shots are Senator Edward Coke Bacon, 2 high-ranking Los Angeles police officers, the mayor of a town called Mad Dog, Texas, a New York fight promoter, a Boston pharmacist, a Detroit ceramicist, a Chicago communist, 3 New Mexico hippie leaders, a New Orleans restaurateur, a barber in Yorba Linda, California, and a sausage manufacturer in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. There were bomb explosions at 15 locations, killing 13 more people. 6 persons around the country have disappeared, and 4 of these were being seen forced into cars at different times last night and this morning. The Attorney General today called this a reign of terror perpetrated by organized crime, pointing out that though the motives for the widely scattered slayings is obscure, they bear the earmarks of gangster killings. However, new FBI Director George Wallace, who has ordered FBI agents around the country into action, issued a written statement declaring, quote, "Once again, the Attorney General has treed the wrong coon, proving that law enforcement should be left to the experienced professionals. We have reason to think that these murders are the work of Negro communists, directed from Peking." End of quote. Meanwhile, the Office of the Vice President has issued an apology to the Italian-American Anti-Defamation League for his reference to mafioso rubouts, and the League has withdrawn its picket line from the White House. Remember, the Attorney General will address the nation at 6 p.m. tonight.
The announcer suddenly changed his facial expression from neutral newscaster to pugnacious patriot.
Certain dissident elements keep complaining that people don't get a chance to participate in decisions made by their government. Yet at a time like this, when the whole nation has an opportunity to hear the Attorney General, the ratings are not always as good as they should be. So let's do everything we can to build up those ratings tonight and let the whole world know that this is still a democracy.
Fuck! George shouted at the screen. He didn't recall TV newscasters being that obnoxious. Must be a fairly recent development, something that had happened after he left for Mad Dog. Maybe a late outgrowth of the Fernando Poo crisis. It was in this very hotel, George remembered, after the bloody Fernando Poo demonstrations at the UN, that Joe Malick first broached the subject of Mad Dog. Now Joe had disappeared, not unlike those people who, as George knew, the syndicate had snuffed in earnest of their good intentions, having accepted Hagbard's gift of objets d'art. Not unlike Inspector Saul Goodman, who perhaps had gone down the same rabbit hole as Joe. There was a knock at the door. George went to it, turning off the TV set in passing. It was Stella Maris.
Well, Glad to see you, baby. Strip off that dress and come over to the bed so we can reaffirm my initiation rites.
Stella put her hands on his shoulders.
Never mind that now, George. We've got things to worry about. Robert Putney Drake and Banana Nose Maldonado are dead. Come on. We've got to get back to Hagbard right away.
Traveling first by helicopter, then by executive jet, and finally by motorboat to Hagbard's Chesapeake Bay submarine base, George was exhausted and dazed in terror's aftermath. He rallied when he saw Hagbard again.
You motherfucker! You sent me to get goddamn killed!
And that has given you the courage to tell me off,
said Hagbard with an indulgent smile.
Fear is a funny thing, isn't it, George? If we weren't afraid of dying of diseases, we'd never develop the science of microbiology. That science, in turn, creates the possibility of germ warfare, and each superpower is so afraid the others may wage germ warfare against it, each develops its own plagues to wipe out the human race.
Your mind is wandering, you stupid old fart,
said Stella.
George isn't kidding about nearly being killed.
The fear of death is the beginning of slavery,
Hagbard said simply. Even though it was early, George found himself on the verge of collapse, ready to sleep for 24 hours or more. The submarine's engines vibrated under his feet as he trudged to his cabin, but he wasn't even curious about where they were going. He lay down on his bed and picked a book off the headpost bookshelf, part of his getting ready for sleep ritual.
Sexuality, magic, and perversion,
said the binder. Well, that sounded juicy and promising. Author named Francis King, whoever that is. Citadel Press, 1972. Only a few years ago.
Well then.
George opened at random.
Within a few years, Frater Peregrinus had become chief of the Swiss section of the OTO, had entered into friendly relationships with the disciples of Aleister Crowley, notably Karl Germer, and had established a magazine. Subsequently, Frater Peregrinus inherited the chieftainship of Crumheller's ancient Rosicrucian fraternity and the patriarchate of the Gnostic Catholic Church. This latter dignity he derived from Chevalier, murdered by the Gestapo in 1944, who was himself the successor of Johnny Bricod. Frater Peregrinus is also the head of one of the several groups who claim to be the true heirs and successors of the Illuminati of Weishaupt, as revived, circa 1895, by Leopold Engel.
George blinked. Several Illuminati. He had to ask Hagbard about this, but he was already beginning to visualize into hypnagogic reverie, and sleep was coming. In less than a half hour, Joe had distributed 92 paper cups of tomato juice containing the drug that promised to turn neophobes into neophiles. He stood in Pioneer Court, just north of the Michigan Avenue Bridge, at a table from which hung a poster reading, "Free tomato juice." Each person who took a cupful was invited to fill out a short questionnaire and leave it in a box on Joe's table. However, Joe explained the questionnaire was optional, and anyone who wanted to drink the tomato juice and run was welcome to do so. Would work just as well either way, but the questionnaire would give ELF an opportunity to trace its effect on some of the subjects. A tall black policeman was suddenly standing in front of the table.
You got a permit for this?
You bet,
said Joe with a quick smile.
I'm with the General Services Corporation, and we're running a test on a new brand of tomato juice. Care to try some, officer?
No thanks,
said the cop unsmilingly.
We had a bunch of hippies threatening to put LSD in the city's water supply 2 years ago. Let's just see your credentials.
There was something cold, hard, and homicidal in this cop's eyes, Joe thought. Something beyond the ordinary. This would be a unique guy, and the stuff would affect him uniquely. Joe looked down at the nameplate on the policeman's jacket, which read Waterhouse. The line behind Patrolman Waterhouse was getting longer. Joe found the paper Malaclips had given him. He handed it to Waterhouse, who glanced at it and said,
"This isn't enough. You apparently didn't tell them you're going to set up your stand in Pioneer Court. You're blocking pedestrian traffic here. This is a busy area. You have to move."
Joe looked out at the street where crowds walked back and forth, at the bridge across the green, greasy Chicago River, and at the buildings surrounding Pioneer Court. The brick-paved area was an ample public square, and there was clearly room for everyone. Joe smiled at Waterhouse. He was in Chicago and knew what to do. He took a $10 bill out of his pocket, folded it twice lengthwise, and wrapped it around a cup of the tomato juice, which he deftly filled from the plastic jug on his table. Waterhouse drained the tomato juice without comment, and when he tossed the cup into the wastebasket, the $10 bill was gone. a bunch of bald-headed, cackling, small-town businessman types was lined up in front of the table. Each one wore an acetate-covered badge bearing a red Crusader's cross, the letters KCUF, and the words, Dominus Vobiscum, my name is... Joe smilingly handed them cups of tomato juice, noting that the lapels of several bore an additional decoration, a square white plastic cross with the letters CL printed across it. Any of these men, Joe knew, would love to put him in jail for the rest of his life because he was the publisher of a radical magazine that occasionally got very explicit about sex and several times had published what Joe considered very beautiful erotica. The Knights of Christianity United for the Faith were rumored to be behind the firebombing of 2 theaters in the Midwest and the lynching of a news dealer in Alabama. And, of course, they had close ties with Atlanta Hope's God's Lightning Party.
Would be strong medicine for this bunch,
Joe thought. He wondered if it would get them off their censorship kick or just make them more formidable. In either case, they would be bound to bust loose from Illuminati control for a time. If only there were a way he and Simon could get into their convention and administer to more of them. Behind the KCUF contingent, there was a small man who looked like a rooster with a gray comb. When Joe read the questionnaire later, he found out that he had administered to Judge Caligula Bushman, a shining ornament of the Chicago judiciary. There followed a succession of faces Joe did not find memorable. They all had that complex, stupid, shrewd, angry, defeated, cynical, gullible look characteristic of Chicago, New York, and other big cities. Then he found himself confronting a tall redhead whose features seemed to combine the best of Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe.
Any vodka in that?
She asked him.
No, ma'am. Just straight tomato juice,
said Joe.
Too bad,
she said as she tossed it down.
I could use one.
Caligula Bushman, known as the toughest judge on the Chicago bench, was trying 6 people who were charged with attacking a draft board, destroying all its furniture, ruining its files, and dumping a wheelbarrow full of cow manure on the floor. Suddenly, Bushman interrupted the trial about halfway through the prosecution's presentation of its case with the announcement that he was going to hold a sanity hearing. To the bewilderment of all, he then asked State's Attorney Milo A. Flanagan a series of rather odd questions.
What would you think of a man who not only kept an arsenal in his home, but was collecting at enormous financial sacrifice a second arsenal to protect the first one? What would you say if this man so frightened his neighbors that they in turn were collecting weapons to protect themselves from him? What if this man spent 10 times as much money on his expensive weapons as he did on the education of his children? What if one of his children criticized his hobby and he called that child a traitor and a bum and disowned it? And he took another child who had obeyed him faithfully and armed that child and sent it out into the world to attack neighbors. Well, what would you say about a man who introduces poisons into the water he drinks and the air he breathes? What if this man not only is feuding with the people on his block, but involves himself in the quarrels of others in distant parts of the city and even in the suburbs? Such a man would clearly be a paranoid schizophrenic, Mr. Flanagan, with homicidal tendencies. This is the man who should be on trial. Though under our modern enlightened system of jurisprudence, we would attempt to cure and rehabilitate him rather than merely punish. Speaking as a judge,
he continued,
I dismiss this case on several grounds. The state is clinically insane as a corporate entity and is absolutely unfit to arrest, try, and incarcerate those who disagree with its policies. But I doubt that this judgment, though obvious to any man of common sense, quite fits into the rules of our American jurisprudential game. I also rule, therefore, that the right to destroy government property is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and therefore, the crime with which these people are charged is not a crime under the Constitution. Government property belongs to all of the people, and the right of any of the people to express their displeasure with their government by destroying government property is precious and shall not be infringed.
This doctrine had come to Judge Bushman suddenly while he was speaking without his robe. It startled him, but he had noticed that his mind was working better and faster this afternoon. He went on.
The state does not exist as a person or thing exists, but is a legal fiction. A fiction is a form of communication. Anything said to be owned by a form of communication must also thereby be itself a form of communication. Government is a map, and government paper is a map of the map. The medium in this case is definitely the message, as any semanticist would agree. Furthermore, any physical act directed against a communication is itself a communication, a map of the map of the map. Thus, destruction of government property is protected by the First Amendment. I will issue a more ample written opinion on this point, but I feel now that the defendants need suffer endurance no longer. Case dismissed.
Many spectators trooped out of the courtroom sullenly, while those who loved the defendants surrounded them with tears, laughter, and hugs. Judge Bushman, who stepped down from the bench but remained in the courtroom, was the benign center of a cluster of reporters. He was thinking that his opinion would be a map of the map of the map of the map, or a fourth-order map. How many potential further orders of symbolism were there? He barely heard the praises showered on him. Of course, he knew his decision would be overturned, but the judge business already bored him. It would be interesting to get into mathematics, really deep. Harold Canberra had not bothered to fill out a questionnaire, and therefore was not under observation and was not protected. He returned to his home and his job as an accountant, and his avocation, which was recording telephone spiels against the Illuminati, the communists, the socialists, the liberals, the middle-of-the-roaders, and all insufficiently conservative Republicans. Mr. Canberra also mailed out similar pamphlets whenever anybody was intrigued enough by his phone messages to send him 25 cents for additional information. He performed these worthy educational services for a group calling itself White Heroes Opposing Red Extremism, which was a splinter off Taxpayers Warring Against Tyranny, which was a splinter off God's Lightning. In the following weeks, however, strange new ideas began to appear in Canberra's taped phone messages.
Lower taxes aren't enough,
he said, for instance.
When you hear some so-called conservative bircher or some follower of William Buckley Jr. call for lower taxes, beware. There's a man who's squishy soft on Illuminism. All taxes are robbery. Instead of attacking Joan Baez, a real American should support her for refusing to pay any more money into the Illuminati treasury in Washington.
The next week was even more interesting.
White Heroes Opposing Red Extremism has often told you that there's no real difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. Both are pawns of the Illuminati scheme to destroy private property and make everybody a slave of the state, so the international bankers of a certain minority group can run everything. Now it's time for all thinking patriots to take an even more skeptical look than ever before at the so-called anti-Illuminati John Birch Society. Why are they always putting up those stickers saying, support your local police? Ever wonder about that? What's the most important thing to a police state? Isn't it police? And if we got rid of the police, how could we ever have a police state? Think about it, fellow Americans, and remember the Alamo.
A few of these new strange ideas had come from various right-wing anarchist periodicals, all secretly subsidized by Hagbard Chalene, that Canberra had mysteriously received 3 months earlier and hadn't glanced at until swallowing the Om. These periodicals had been mailed by Simon Moon as a joke in an envelope with the return address Illuminati International, 34 East 68th Street, New York City, the headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations, long regarded by the Birchers as an Illuminati hotbed. Remember the Alamo, Canberra had picked up from Bowie Knife, a publication of the Davy Crockett Society, a paramilitary right-wing fascist group which had splintered off God's Lightning when their leader, a Texas oil millionaire of gigantic paranoias, became convinced that many apparent Mexicans were actually red Chinese agents in slight disguise. Later, the dogma became retroactive, and he claimed that the Chinese had always been communists, all Mexicans had always been Chinese, and the attack on the Alamo was the first communist assault against American capitalism. The third week was quite remarkable. Evidently, Om, like LSD, changed some personality traits but left others fairly intact. In any event, in Canberra's irregular evolution from right-wing authoritarianism to right-wing libertarianism, he had somehow managed to arrive at a thesis never before enunciated, except by Donation Alphonse Francois de Sade. What this rare man did was to give a 3-minute spiel in favor of the right of any person of either sex to use any other person of either sex with or without their consent for sexual gratification of any sort needed or at least desired. The only option he granted the recipients of these intimate invasions was the reciprocal right to use the initiator for their own needs or desires. Now, most of the people who regularly called Canberra's phone service were not offended by any of this. They were Lincoln Avenue hippies and dialed him only when stoned for what they called a really weird and far-out head trip. And they were bored that he was no longer as funky as in his old Negro-baiting, Jew-hating, and Illuminati-castigating days. However, there were a few members of the white heroes opposing red extremism who called occasionally to check that their contributions were still financing the dissemination of true Americanism. And these people were severely puzzled and finally disturbed. Some of them even wrote to whore headquarters in Mad Dog, Texas, to complain that there was something a little bit peculiar in the Americanism lately. However, the president of whore, Dr. Horace Naismith, who also ran the John Dillinger Died For You Society, Veterans of the Sexual Revolution, and the Colossus of Yorba Linda Foundation, was in it only for the money, sad to say, and had no time for such petty complaints. He was too busy implementing his newest fundraising scheme, the male chauvinist organization, Macho, which he hoped would milk mucho dineros from Russ Meyers, illegal abortionists, pimps, industrialists who regularly paid female workers 30% of the salaries of men doing the same jobs, and all others threatened by the women's liberation movement. The fourth week was, to be frank about it, definitely bizarre. Canberra discoursed at length on the lost civilization that once existed in the Gobi Desert, and denounced those, such as Brian Geisen, who believed it had destroyed itself in atomic war. Rather, he asserted, it had been obliterated when the Illuminati arrived from the planet Vulcan in flying saucers. Remember the Alamo was now replaced by Remember Carcosa, Canberra having discerned that both Ambrose Bierce and H.P. Lovecraft were describing this tragic Gobian society in their fiction. The hippies were again delighted. This was the funky kind of trip that had originally made Canberra a mock folk hero among them. And they especially appreciated his call for the U.S. to abandon the next moonshot and launch a punitive expedition to Vulcan, both to wipe out Illuminism at its source and to avenge poor Carcosa. The horror regulars, however, were again upset. All that concern with Carcosa struck them as creeping one-worldism. The fifth week, Canberra took a new turn, denouncing the masses for their stupidity and proclaiming that the boobs probably deserved being governed by the Illuminati, since most of them were too dumb to find their own behinds in a dark room, even using both hands. He had been browsing through a volume of H.L. Mencken, sent to him over a year earlier by El Hajj Stackerly Muhammad Nay Pearson, after one of his put prayers back in the public school tirades. But he had also been pondering an invitation to join the Illuminati. This document, which came in an envelope with no return address, informed him that he was too smart to stay with the losers all his life and ought to climb on the winning side before it was too late. It added that membership dues were $3,125, which should be put in a cigar box and buried in his backyard, after which it was promised, one of our underground agents will contact you. At first, Canberra had considered this a hoax. He received many put-ons in the mail, together with pornography, Rosicrucian pamphlets illustrated with the eye and pyramid design, and pretended fan letters signed by such names as Eldridge Cleaver, Fidel Castro, Anton Zandor LaVey, or Judge Crater, all of course cooked up by his Lincoln Avenue audience. Later, however, it struck him that 3,125 was 5 to the 5th power, and that convinced him that a true Illuminatus was indeed communicating with him. He took the $3,125 out of his savings account, buried it as instructed, made a pro-Illuminati recording as a gesture of good faith, and waited. The next day, he was shot several times in the head and shoulders, dying of natural causes as a result. In present time again, Rebecca Goodman enters the Hotel Tudor lobby in answer to the second mysterious phone call of the day, while Hagbard decides George Dorn needs to be Illuminized further before Ingolstadt. An Esperanto despot clears his throat and says,
I want to explain the mathematics of plague to you men.
Actually, poor old Canberra's death had nothing to do with the Illuminati or with his former compatriots in Hor. The man had been practicing the libertine philosophy of his post-Om phone editorials and had tampered with Cassandra Akansi, the beloved daughter of Ronald Akansi, Chicago regional commander of God's Lightning and a longtime contributor to KCUF. Akansi arranged, via State's Attorney Milo A. Flanagan, for the local mob to do a hit on Canberra. But there are no endings, any more than there are any beginnings. It next developed that Canberra's seed lived on in wedlock with Cassandra's ovum and was in danger of becoming a human being within her previously trim abdomen. Saul Goodman had no idea that the room he was in had last been rented to George Dorn. He was conscious only of his impatience, not knowing that Rebecca was at that moment on an elevator approaching his floor. And a mile north, Peter Jackson, still trying to put together the July issue of Confrontation, virtually single-handed, dives into the slush pile, which is the magazine industry's elegant name for unsolicited manuscripts, and comes up with more fallout from the Moon Malik project of 1970. Orthodox science, the new religion, he reads.
Well, let's sample it. What the hell?
Opening at random, he finds,
Einstein's concept of spherical space, furthermore, suffers from the same defect as the concept of a smoothly or perfectly spherical Earth. It rests upon the use of the irrational number pi. This number has no operational definition. There is no place on any engineer's scale to which one can point and say, this is exactly pi, although these scales are misleadingly marked with such a spot. Pi, in fact, can never be found in the real world, and there are historical and archaeological reasons to believe it was created by a Greek mathematician under the influence of the mind-warping hallucinogenic mushroom Amanita muscaria. It is pure surrealism. You cannot write pi as a real number. You can only approximate it as 3.1417, etc. Chemistry knows no such units. 3 atoms of an element may combine with 4 atoms of another element, but you will never find pi atoms combining with anything. Quantum physics reveals that an electron may jump 3 units or 4 units, but it will not jump pi units. Nor is pi necessary to geometry, as is sometimes claimed. R. Buckminster Fuller has created an entire geometric system at least as reliable as that of the ancient Greek dope fiends, in which pi does not appear at all. Space, then, may be slanted or kiltered in various ways, but it cannot be smoothly spherical.
What the ring-tailed rambling hell?
Peter Jackson said aloud. He flipped to the end.
In conclusion, I want to thank a strange and uncommon man, James Mallison, who provided the spark which set me thinking about these matters. In fact, it was due to my meeting with Mr. Mallison that I sold my hardware business, returned to college, and majored in cartography and topology. Although he was a religious fanatic, as I was at the time of our meeting, and would therefore not appreciate many of my discoveries, it is due to this man's perverse, peculiar, and yet brilliant prodding that I embarked on the search which has led to this new theory of a pentahedroidal universe. W. Clement Kotex, Ph.D.
Far fucking out,
Peter muttered. James Mallison was a pen name Joe Malik sometimes used. And here was another James Mallison, inspiring this guy to become a PhD and invent a new cosmological theory.
What was the word Joe used for such coincidences? Sync something.
1,472.
Esperando Despin concludes his gloomy mathematical calculations.
That's the number of plague cases we might have right now, at noon, if the girl had only 2 contacts after leaving Dr. Mocenigo. Now, if she had 3 contacts.
The assembled FBI agents are gradually turning a pale greenish color from the neck up. Canal, the only actual contact, is busy 2 blocks away, stuffing money into a briefcase.
Hit that jive jack, put it in pocket like it's back. Going downtown, see a man and ain't got time, shake your head. Hit that jive jack, put it in pocket like it's back. Time and time waits for no man that ain't got time, shake your head. Hit that jive jack, put it in pocket like it's back. Go downtown and see a man and ain't got time, shake your head. Hit that jive jack, put it in pocket like it's back. Time and time waits for no man that ain't got time, shake your head. Hit that jive jack, put it in pocket
Oh, Saturday sun, I met someone. West Coast, I gotta get back, I can't let this go. Saturday sun, I met someone. Don't care what it costs, no ray of sunlight's ever lost.
Yes, I am infuriated. You offended me, friend.
So instead, down and done for doubles.
Dogless speech, yeah. I eat dogs. Do that agree.
What's going on, friend? How have you found that libertarianism because Forced by fire is a treacherous servant. I think any conversation is like placing a show that government programs being the treacherous servant. I can't figure this product is very diabolical and very destructive. There's nothing to be wrong for it, for that night I can have I don't think we should move in that
It's obviously Chinese now understand the behavior of the COVID-19 virus thanks to autopsies that they have carried out. This virus is characterized by obstructing respiratory pathways with thick mucus that solidifies and blocks the airways and lungs. So they have discovered that in order to be able to apply a medicine, you have to open and unblock these airways so that the treatment can be used. However, all of this is an their recommendation for you to
my friends and at the same time in a line coming out not to do it, but I did it. Wow. So we are podcasting at a record of pod in the
If you cannot wash your clothes daily, hang them in direct sunlight, which also neutralizes the virus. Number 4. Wash metallic surfaces very carefully because the virus can remain viable on these for up to 9 days. Take note and be vigilant about touching handrails and door handles, etc. I guess within your own house as well, you can make sure that you are keeping them clean and wiping them down regularly. Number 5, don't smoke. Number 6, wash your hands every 20 minutes using any soap that foams. Do this for 20 seconds and wash your hands thoroughly. Number 7, eat fruits and vegetables. Try to elevate your zinc level, not just your vitamin C level. Number 8, animals do not spread the virus to people. Person-to-person transmission. Number 9, try to avoid getting the common flu. I guess this is just already weakened your system. And try to avoid eating and drinking cold things. And number 10, if you feel any discomfort in your throat or a sore throat coming on, attack it immediately using the above method. The virus enters the system this way and remains for 3 or 4 days within the throat before it passes into the lungs. Good luck to everyone. Take care of yourself and pass this information along if you wish. So, I've heard a lot of the same thing from a lot of different sources, so it seems to me that this is now kind of very credible advice that people can be taking on board to try and protect themselves. Hope it helps. Bye. the fist diamonds and pearls on me. 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 Walking 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 fist diamonds and pearls on me. Walk the fist, diamonds and pearls, I mean. 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 Walk the fist, diamonds
diamonds and pearls on me. Walking fist 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 diamonds and pearls on me. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. 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 Diamonds and pearls, I mean. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. I mean. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. Diamonds and pearls. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. Walking fish, diamonds and pearls, fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean. Walking 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 fish, diamonds and pearls, I mean.